The first step that, first thing that we want to do for clinical validation, the simplest thing to do, the stupidest thing to do almost, is just to take the models that Glenn has trained on self-stated diagnoses and just apply them to the EHR. These models, they basically give us for each message some sort of probability that the message came from a non-neurotypical, somebody with a mental condition. It's sort of we had to do sort of a non-linear transformation across messages. We didn't want to just call a person's probability the average of all their messages. That wouldn't make sense. So going back to sort of a clinical insight, we wanted to use a rolling window sort of technique to find the period of time when that user is highest risk, when they look most like a person with this condition, and then that's how we label that individual. That's how we score that individual. So we did that on Facebook. Each message gets a score. Each person is scored by their highest period of risk for 5 conditions, and compared that to whether the individual has a diagnosis in that category in their medical record. So like Andy said, not a great gold standard, but it's what we have. It's a more objective measure than self-statement. It has some expertise backing it up. We don't have very many suicide attempts in the EHR, so we're including ideation in that. So these were our results. We brought over 5 models, compared them to 5 categories in the EHR: anxiety disorders, eating disorders, panic disorders, schizophrenia, and a suicide attempt. And like I said, in the EHR, that a person would be positive in that class if they had a record of ideation in their medical record. And what you can see is that the y-axis is area under the ROC curve. None of them are spectacular. They're not as good as they were in domain. They're not as good as they were on the self-stated data. But there's a definite pattern, and for 4 of them, it's what we were expecting. We were expecting the models for panic disorder, schizophrenia, and suicide attempt to do reasonably well. Eating disorders, we were unsurprised. The hypothesis was that it wouldn't do very well, simply because of the nature of how people interact with others on Twitter versus Facebook. Remember, on the EHR, this is all Facebook data. The level of anonymization is much lower if it exists at all. The Twitter community for eating disorders is not what you would expect. If people talked about eating disorders on Facebook the way they talk about eating disorders on Twitter, as Glenn said, it pops right out. Their friends and family would stage interventions. It's a self-perpetuating community. The disorder is...
Pro-Anna and Pro-Nia are the communities you end up seeing with them. You're familiar with this? And largely giving tips and tricks for how to be anorexic or bulimic. And if someone did this on Facebook, without a doubt, someone would have done it.
And the language that we're picking up, to be clear, is not solely about the disorders, especially on Facebook. People aren't talking about their panic, their schizophrenia, or their suicide attempt. It's an overall pattern of language that's indicative of these conditions. The one that sticks out as perhaps not what we were expecting is anxiety. The model does not perform well. The model trained on the self-stated data brought over to the EHR does not perform well. We're going to get into some language insight results in a little bit. Molly's going to tell us about that perhaps points to why that might be. As a sort of a preview, it's a very different demographic in the Facebook sample, urban Philadelphia versus Twitter at large, which is tends to be whiter.
Patrick, before you go on, there's of course there's a big difference in language use in Twitter versus Facebook, period, regardless of any underlying conditions.
Yes.
Right? So whatever features you're extracting out of a Twitter message or a bunch of Twitter messages.
Yeah, we're actually gonna see a great slide on it and like.
No, the question is, are these results in any way compensating for that?
The only thing that we did was took out any features from the Twitter model that were usernames, @ and URLs.
But you didn't take care of any distributional differences, like,
Nope.
for example, there's more of something or less of something else.
No, the models came straight over their character language models.
So is there anything in the model besides usernames?
Character
Character. Character renderings. Up to what then? 5. Thanks.
Very simple model, so
Yeah.
we can do some perspective.
Yeah. So it's not especially focused on Twitter. So we expected it to perform in that sense out of domain reasonably.
And just for comparison, these are the same models for which there were curves earlier in Glenn's presentation. So remind me again, what were the area under the curve for those guys? Were they like 0.7, 0.6, 0.9?
Yeah, so the lowest ones are in the like 0.7 range, and the highest ones are in the like 0.9 range.
Okay.
But there is, I mean, you'll hear a lot more about this later. Like, this is meant to just be like, we got largely clinical validation. Because we're going to dive into exactly some of these differences in
And with that, I will turn it over to Adrian to talk about a different sort of model that we applied to our data sets.